No, tafsir is today. Well, I mean,
تفسير.
tomorrow is fiqh.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
التوقيت تبعه.
So for the fiqh, inshallah,
تفسير.
will be uh soon concluding fiqh of marriage. We'll be soon concluding that, inshallah. Get just a few classes, inshallah, and we'll be finished with that. All right, here we go. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone, inshallah, we're going to be continuing with our tafsir right there. وَهَذَا كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مُبَارَكٌ فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. And we talked about the letter fat right there, and we said, and we promised that we're going to talk about the shadda. We're going to talk about it in just a bit, okay? So, فَاتَّبِعُوهُ واتقوا لعلكم ترحمون. So فاتبعوه, and we talked about فاتبعوه as in following it, and following what? Well, following the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at least the revelation. Which book is it referring to? Is the هذا, which basically carries a pronoun. It's a preposition and carrying a pronoun as well. And this book, so is this referring to the Quran, or is this referring to the Torah itself? So majority of the scholars actually said that this is referring to, possibly majority of scholars said that this is referring to the Quran, but other scholars, they said it can be, based on the context, it can also refer to the Torah itself. So they said, based on the context, وَهَذَا كِتَابٌ, so this would continue as with the last noun that it was talking about, which is the Torah. But then the scholars that said that it could also include, or it can also refer to the Quran, or not also, but it can refer to the Quran, they said because it said وَهَذَا كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مُبَارَكٌ, so they said this letter wa. Now, I want you to look at this wa. I don't want to go in so many details with the letter wa right now because that's a lot of details, but the letter wa can mean as an addition to the previous quote or the previous context, and could it also mean that this is a new start, or can also mean an oath as well. So we're looking at a number of different meanings for the letter wa, but just because of those, let's say, numerous meanings, just for the letter what? Is it just an addition? Is it giving me a new topic? In other words, a new sequence that's not necessarily related to the previous sequence. So it's kind of like starting a new sentence. Okay, so that's that differences of opinions between scholars in what this letter wa would mean. And inshallah, we'll be talking about that later on. But just the same way that we did with the letter la'alla, or with the word la'alla and all those multiple meanings, or the word thumma and those multiple meanings as well. Well, that's the same thing for the letter wa, okay? Just so that we would see it. Okay, well, I also wanted to do that fattabi'u, which is that shadda, and I had prepared the number of different meanings that we get out of shadda. Now, previously, we talked about the shadda to mean at least a foundation, to mean one, repetition, two, to mean consistency, and three, to mean determination. But that's very simplistic. So I thought it would be good to actually give more meanings now that we pretty much, had been talking about the shadda before, and it would be fair to give more meanings and expand our knowledge in relationship to the shadda. Now remember, the shadda in Lugha Arabiya can be given. So if you were to go to the book, since Ustaza Umayya would be asking about the references. So if you were to go to the references for Lugha Arabiya, they'll basically give you that name as معاني التضعيف. They'll give it to you as التضعيف. The word تضعيف means doubling, so that's what the shadda is all about. So whenever you see a shadda, wait a minute, so what does the shadda look like? What did you say the shadda looks like? Well, the shadda looks like this little upside down 3 right there. You see it? Maybe I should draw it. Okay, this little upside down 3 right there. This is the shadda. So should we make it big? Here we go. This is the shadda right here. Okay, so that's exactly what we're talking about. We're just talking about this upside down 3 and what that actually means. So that is called تضعيف or shadda. Just like when you say shadda, allama, kabbar. All right. Now, what that shadda really means, it actually means that it's this letter 2 times, but not really 2 times. One of them is going to have a sukoon, at least the first one is, and then the second one is going to have a fatha, okay, or a dhamma, okay, or a kasra. All right. Now, so when you see shadda, that actually means, this means shad. Okay, I'm going to write it down for you here. Shad, and this one would have a sukoon, and then you would have another dal, and then that would have, let's say, a fatha right there, and then they would blend it together and say, okay, why put it shadda like that? Why don't we just blend it together and just put a shadda? And that's what they said. So the shadda, think of it as a stress. So it's stressing the same letter twice. Okay, so that's what the shadda basically means. Okay, now this shadda in Lugha Arabiya, it's not just, oh, we're just making this letter up 2 times and all of that. No, there are multiple meanings for that shadda, and depending on the context, and sometimes the scholars of tafsir or the scholars of Lugha Arabiya may have differences of opinions on the interpretation based on the following interpretations, or at least known interpretations to that shadda. The first one is basically that the shadda is indicating a form of takthir and mubalagha. Now, when you look at takthir, this is actually talking about intensity. It's basically indicating strong action, emphasis, intensifying something, giving me this emphasis is to basically mean that I'm basically stressing on whatever verb or whatever word I am using. Now, remember, if you're going to be using the shadda, you're basically going to be using it in a verb. Okay, let's see. So let's give an example. وَكَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا. Okay, what does the word كَذَّبُوا here mean? So the word كَذَّبُوا, it basically means they were persistent, they were strongly, in other words, this is to show an emphasis, this is to show a strong action, and therefore the root is كَذَّبَ. That's the root. The root is كَذَّبَ, but because they were extremely, that's the root. Because they were extremely, or at least they were extreme, they were persistent, they were strongly denying. That's why the ayah used that shad to say كَذَّبُوا. That's to indicate that there was a persistent action of denial that needed to basically get that expression. So the ayah used كذبوا and the word كذابة. And of course, that's the strongest type of a description. When you would use the same word, and this is basically right there that المفعول المطلق, and you're using it as 2 times. كذبوا كذابة. They didn't just deny any type of denial, but it was such a strong, persistent denial that they were just wholeheartedly embracing this denial. Okay, إنه كان ظلاما جهولا. The word ظلاما is to give me that this person wasn't just a tyrant, wasn't just oppressive, but they were extremely oppressive. They were extremely unjust. So therefore, you could see that one. The second meaning for that is التعدية. What does التعدية mean? So التعدية basically means that this is showing transitivity and showing a causation. It's telling me that this verb is basically causing someone else to do the action. So علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. So when you say علم, this is to tell you that when you yourself probably put the effort to seek knowledge. Well, you're using one side of it, but the true one to give you that knowledge and the true one to put in the force to make that possible is really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you look at the word allama is to let you know, well, okay, you put in one effort, but the true force was coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now you say, allama is to basically mean that there is another force that is put on that force, on that verb of alima, to know, and therefore let you know that the true knowledge is not necessarily just a process of your brain doing some matter in motion, but that it's actually coming from the Lord Almighty to cause the brain to progress, to evolve, to basically function in a certain way to make that happen. That's the same thing. نزل عليك الكتابة. It basically lets us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed the book, but then that revelation basically had a process to it. The process, Jibreel alayhi salam, the process, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, taking the Quran and basically letting you know that there was a process to this revelation and just learning that the amount of rahmah coming from Rabbil Alameen. The other part is basically التدرج والتكثير في الحدث. It's basically to indicate a gradual process. This gradual process to indicate that there were a number of different stages that basically let this happen. So same thing when you talk about نزل عليك الكتاب تنزيلا or تنزيل من رب العالمين. What are we indicating here? Well, we're talking about نزل as to also mean not only was there that process of what was happening, but there was a gradual process. There was a gradual process to basically have this revelation be delivered to what it is, at least during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and what it is today. In other words, it didn't happen all instantly, but it was nazzala to mean a gradual process. The other part is repetition. We already know that one. So we're talking about repetition, continuity, and of course that is in order to let us know that this action, it basically had to happen at repetitive behavior, repetitive action in order to make it possible. So when you look at غلقت الأبواب, she locked the doors one after another. Why did it say one after another? So this one after another was really, when you look at it, just the word غلقت الأبواب. She closed the doors. Well, close the doors, if you were to say close the doors, that would really just say غلقت الأبواب. But غلقت الأبواب is closed the doors. But غلقت, that shadda right there is basically that indication that she saw one door and another door and another door, and she continuously, because she was living in a fortress, so there were a number of different doors, but she was persistent. She was definitely continuing her action because she had a plan. And that plan is to make sure that no one witnesses her devious action. So she closed one door after another, and she was persistent, continuous in the way that she wanted to make sure that she would lock one door after another. And that's the same thing when you look at the verb. يقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل. Now, يقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل, that's one قراءة. There's another قراءة, يقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل. Okay, so what is this referring to anyways? So what this refers to, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was describing those people. Of course, if you are living self-centricity, the self-centricity is going to mean that your relationship with your brothers, with your family, with your mother, with the people around you is really based on interest. If the relationship is based on interest, that's when the girls are usually going to be locked out. They're usually going to be isolated and not going to be regarded as of any importance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said that the kafirin or the munafiqeen or those that are Muslim but not practicing their Islam fully, يقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض. They would break the ties. Look at the word. Break the ties of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered that they would basically affirm or they would deeply connect to. What is that relationship that they're supposed to deeply connect to? It's basically their sisters, their mothers, their aunts. Those are rahim. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described these people, يقطعون or يقطعون in another قراءة. يقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض, that they would break one tie after another. How? Well, they would create a problem or they would invent that there was a reason. My sister one day told me this. My brother told me this one day. That's it. I'm not going to talk to them anymore. Block. And then the other one, they also hurt me. They didn't know how to deal with this, block, and then they'll block one after another of brother, a sister, and then يقطعون ما أمر الله. Number 5, let's look at number 5. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically says فدمرناهم تدميرا. Here's again that المفعول المطلق right there. فدمرناهم. So the root is دمر, and the root دمر, the verb دمر, is to indicate a type of takthif and quwwah. It's to indicate strength and thoroughness. In other words, it is indicating force in a complete action, that there's nothing left behind. So دمرناهم تدميرا, that they were fully destructed where nothing was left behind. The action was complete in basically destructing that city that had rejected Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly that is also to show that there was that action that was intensified in order to show them marnahum and what it means. The other one is a nisba aw al-ittisaf. So what does that mean? It's to attribute, it's to make something possess a quality. In other words, we're talking about a certain attribute that this person put in a certain effort, and then therefore they deserved this description. So here, وَيُطَهِّرُكُمْ تطهيرا. Certainly, يطهركم تطهيرا. مفعول مطلق right there. يطهركم. Not يطهركم. No, يطهركم. And that shadda right there, let's see if we can, right there, يطهركم تطهيرا. That's basically to let you know that this is to make you deserving this quality of being a pure person. Let's go for the other one, which basically means المشاركة أو المقابلة. It's basically to show that there is a multiple object or a detailed execution. So we're talking about detailed action. We're talking about what we called in explaining shadda, we said that it basically shows that an action is being repeated, multiplied, repetition. That's basically what it means. So if you were to use repetition or you were to use multiplicity or detailed action, that's basically what it means. So قتل أصحاب الأخدود in one قراءة and قتل أصحاب الأخدود in another قراءة. Okay, so قتل أصحاب الأخدود or قتل أصحاب الأخدود, what does that mean? So this is to suggest that there was an extreme and repeated killing, just like the one that's happening in Gaza, basically, repeated killing, and certainly the crimes that they had been practicing against the people of faith, they were not only once, but they were repeated, and it was basically a crime after another. So this is in order to let us see all of that. Let's put as at least a summary to all of this. Okay, so in short, we said that what this means, this is talking about intensity. This is talking about this intensity to basically indicate the strong emphasis, and the multiplicity basically telling me that there were many occurrences. Causation basically to make someone do the action, and gradualness is basically to tell us and indicate a step-by-step occurrence. Repetition basically to tell me that there was a continuous and a repeated action. And thoroughness is basically complete execution, completeness when we say دمرناهم تدميرا. Okay, so enough of that shadda. We're going to get to, inshallah, later on, we're going to get to that hal later on. But let's just take it one after another, and hopefully, inshallah, we can get some things explained. Okay, so فاتبعوه واتقوا لعلكم ترحمون. أن تقولوا, I want to look at this one, أن right there. أن تقولوا إنما أنزل الكتاب على طائفتين من قبلنا وإن كنا عن دراستهم لغافلين. Now, here's a question. What does this first mean? When you would say that this was revealed, إنما أنزل الكتاب على طائفتين من قبلنا, that this was revealed onto two different nations before us, and we are unaware of studying, or at least we were pacified away from studying them. Or you would say, if this book was revealed upon us, we would have been more pious than them. So now that you had basically received al-bayyinah. Now remember, now since we're going to be using what we had studied before, we're going to be repeating some things. We're going to start then figuring out this bayyinah, this shadda, and what that shadda really means. Okay, وَجَاءَكُمْ بَيِّنَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةٌ, and you had also received the huda, the guidance, and also the mercy. فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ كَذَّبَ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَصَدَفَ عَنْهَا. Then certainly this is right there. Is it necessarily right there giving me an exclamation, or is this giving me a question right there, or what really is it doing? فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ كَذَّبَ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ. Then who is going to be even worse and far worse in denying the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَصَدَفَ عَنْهَا, and those people that would basically turn away from the words of the Lord Almighty, or at least the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. سنجزي الذين يصدفون عن آياتنا سوء العذاب بما كانوا يصدفون, and we will basically the word sanajzi, sanajzi actually has two meanings. You can say sanajzi to mean reward, and sometimes sanajzi could also mean to punish. In other words, to hold accountable. To hold somebody accountable, this could also mean sanajzi. So when you say jazakillahu khayran, if you were to say jazakillah, this can actually give a very dangerous connotation, because if you were to say jazakillah and without finishing khayran, the connotation usually can mean that you're asking that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would hold me accountable. That's not good. But when you say Jazakillahu khairan, then you're indicating that you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to basically hold me as basically deserving this this reward for doing whatever good that was done. So jazakillahu what khayran. That's basically to say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you best, and to exclude any wrong interpretation. Because just saying jazakillah, this can actually give a very dangerous connotation, because then you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hold me accountable. In other words, it can mean the total opposite of jazakillahu khairan. Okay, so here, sanajzi, we will basically hold accountable, and based on that, they will be punished. سنجزي الذين يصدفون عن آياتنا, and those that would basically deter away from the message of the Lord Almighty, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message, they will be held accountable, as in su al-adhab. What kind of accountability? Su al-adhab, a punishment that is basically a bad punishment. I mean, is there a good punishment? Well, su al-adhab, that's to describe that it is going to be one of the worst. And therefore, we would know that in Jahannam there are different stages for that punishment. بما كانوا يصدفون. And what is it as a result for? And what is the cause of this? بما كانوا يصدفون, because they were the ones to turn away from the message of the Lord Almighty. Okay, now we go back أن تقولوا. When you say أن تقولوا, the question is, did they already say these at least excuses, or is this telling me that, well, if they were to say such excuses, we already have the response and the rebuttals for them? The rebuttal for such excuses, which basically are, one, a way to say that they don't want to believe, they just want to basically turn away. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying, أن تقولوا إنما أنزل الكتاب على طائفتين من قبلنا. So is this suggesting and basically anticipating what claims they will be making, and putting the rebuttals before they would even utter the claim? When the Quran was revealed, that they were basically going to say such defenses, but these defenses are empty, are actually empty of any evidence or any claim or any or any power to basically stand strong, because of the following reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting them know, okay, well, you said that those revelations were sent before you, and therefore you have nothing to do with them. And كنا عن دراستهم لغافلين, that of course when the pagan Arab were told about the Quran, they said, well, I mean, you said that this was to continue the revelation upon Prophet Musa. Well, we are totally unaware of what you're talking about. We were not present, not in the revelation of Prophet Musa, and certainly not during the revelation of Prophet Isa. So if you say that there was a claim that there was a revelation before that basically supported the revelation that was sent right now in the Quran, they basically wanted to say, well, sorry, we know that that's a claim that you're going to make. And if they are to say that, then let them basically get this response that we recognize that they're going to make this claim and that they're going to one day say that, oh, if only this revelation was sent on to us, we would be even better than them. Oh, better than them. So you do recognize that this revelation contains good. You do recognize that there's a lot of good in it, but you just wanted to somehow procrastinate, somehow wanted to stay away from the revelation by saying that, we would have been even better if only we received a revelation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us see that a lot of the people that will say, if only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give me hidayah, I'd actually be a good person. What do you mean if only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you hidayah? You go for hidayah to really show that you really are concerned about hidayah. If you really are concerned about hidayah, you would put in the effort to get it. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those that put the effort in seeking hidayah, those are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide the right path or will guide them to the path. Now, this is extremely important to keep in mind that when they basically would put in and say, لَكُنَّا أَهْدَى مِنْهُمْ. No, if you want to seek hidayah, you would go for it. But the ones that are procrastinating and trying to find the nearest exit and say, you know what, I'm not going to go for this hidayah because it's too harsh on me, because it's asking me to wear this and it's asking me to wake up at this time and it's asking me to do 1, 2, 3, 4 and all these different things. It's like, this person's looking for their own comfort and they don't want to invest in Jannah. If you're looking for your own comfort, at least momentarily comfort, then certainly you're not necessarily looking for Jannah, because what you're looking for is something to suit your interests now. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is responding to it and saying, well, they would say, hey, if only we had this, we would be better even in guidance than them. So there is also an inference that they recognize that those people are actually following a level of righteousness. Like, for example, I think I told you the story when I was basically invited to a wedding, and then the people at the door, they refused that I would come in. And I was really confused why they would not let me in. And they said, ma'am, you don't belong in here. And I said, well, why not? But I'm invited. He said, ma'am, this is a nightclub. They just recognize, just by the appearance, just by the clothes, just by the appearance, that this person is seeking righteousness. They don't belong in this place. And that's one thing, is that it is part of our instinct that we recognize ethics. We recognize ethics, whether Muslim or Kafir. It is part of our instinct / fitra, even though, like, they will tell you there's no such thing as a human instinct, but the Quran and Islam basically tells you there is something called a human instinct. And that this human instinct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within you, part of it, one, recognizes Allah Almighty. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ. And what did they say? Bala. They said Bala. All right. So that's one thing that is part of the fitrah, one thing that is part of the instinct. The other thing, part of the instinct, is hygiene. We recognize that something is dirty if it smells bad, if it basically is not good looking either. We would basically, part of our instinct, we would stay away. You could even see it in pets. The cat, for example, if the water is not smelling good, or if perhaps the food had been longer and it's starting to decompose or something, you could see that they'll basically stay away. Certainly, vultures are different because they were created to basically feed on deceased in corpse and all of these different things. That's a different story. Okay, but we're talking about certain clean animals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even called the cat as a tawafin alaykum wa tawafat. Subhanallah, yesterday you were hearing the cat meowing at the door. I didn't open the door yesterday, okay, during class, and he kept on meowing. It turned out that he had caught a gecko, and he wanted to show it to me. And but I was busy in class. So yeah, he wanted to show me his catch. But I was too busy. All right. So now when you look at the fitra, okay, so part of our fitra, part of those fitras we actually share with animals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also let us know that وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُم. Now, letting us know that animals, whether we're speaking about animals that walk on earth or birds that basically fly, that we share with these animals many traits. أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُم. Now, one thing that when in the word أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُم, the word ummah. I want you to look at this one. The word, it didn't say خلق أمثالكم. It just said أمم أمثالكم. And what this really suggests, it's not talking about sharing anatomy only, but this is the word in the word ummah, even suggesting that and letting us know that even when we're speaking about social dynamics that we share with animals, we share with birds, a lot of these social dynamics, and specifically umam. I want you to look at the word umam because the word umam is a plural of ummah. Is a plural of ummah. The word ummah, it actually relates to motherhood. Keep that one in mind. So when you say that the Muslim ummah is an ummah, the Prophet ﷺ called the Muslim ummah as an ummah, in other words, to let us know that it's like one family. The word ummah, they belong to one mother. They belong to one foundation. They belong to one family, and that's why they're called ummah. And the word nation does not actually give me the accuracy in translation because the word ummah is different than the word nation, because the word nation is going back to a certain combination, but that's not necessarily as going back to a certain ummah to mean motherhood. The word nation is talking about a sense of belonging to an earth. But in Islam, a sense of belonging to an earth does not make you an ummah. So Islam let us know that you're an ummah because you go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as your center for that relationship. So just because you and another person that might be Christian, that might be Jewish, perhaps were born on the same land and perhaps live on the same land, that doesn't make you an ummah with them. Because you, as a Muslim, even if that person was probably in China, he's part of the ummah because what really matters is the foundation And that foundation is the centricity of Tanzil, that centricity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of Tawheed, of basically that Kitab, that Quran. That's why you would be an ummah and not a nation. Because a nation would suggest that you belong to a specific earth. That because we belong to a specific earth, we belong to a specific country, that we are basically an ummah. No, no, no. An ummah is different than a nation. Okay. So now that we see that, why did we get into an ummah? Yeah. So the part about fitrah. Okay, the part about fitrah, number one, we said a part of fitrah is faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Part of fitrah is basically recognizing hygiene. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us know, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'anzir, wa rabbaka fakabbir. Now, part of our fitrah is looking at qum fa'anzir, wa rabbaka fakabbir. Part of our fitrah is to recognize that there is a purpose that preceded our existence and that there is a purpose for life. That's part of our fitrah. You would recognize that there is a reason to why I was created. What is the reason for my existence? You cannot live with no mission. In fact, even an atheist, they recognize that you cannot live without a mission. So they created, because they don't believe a purpose that preceded your existence. So they created a type of existentialism, at least John Paul Sartre created existentialism. You know, you can create your own reason, create your own purpose, and you don't have to think that there is a purpose that preceded your existence. So that's what they basically did with existentialism. It's like you could create your own purpose. Your own purpose could be that I want to, I don't know, perhaps create a design, perhaps that would make people's lives better. Okay, thank you very much. But is that really the purpose that you were created for? What you were created for is a purpose that preceded your existence and your creation. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us know that this design cannot happen without a designer basically blueprinting the design and what it was basically designed to function into, or what it was designed to do. So the idea of seeing preceded the idea of creating your sight. The idea of hearing preceded the idea of creating your ears. The idea of breathing preceded the idea of creating your lungs. Your lungs didn't just exist and they thought, okay, well, maybe we could use this for one or two different things, or maybe we could use it for this reason. No, they didn't do that because they're not even thinkable creatures. So the lung itself basically got created and designed to do a certain function. Now, having that being said, there is then a mastermind, or a master hakim, a master khabir, a master alim. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we would use, instead of the word master, we would use al-alim, al-khabir, al-hakim. We would use that al in order to indicate that master, that beyond, that one that exceeds all. So we would use the al to basically mean master. So because of that, now we would say part of our fitrah, number three, we said, we'll recognize that there's a purpose that preceded existence. And number four, other fitrahs that, such as, for example, male, basically finding attraction to female, female attraction to male, etc. So those basically are part of fitrah. Those are part of fitra. And a motherly instinct when, of course, what you would see a motherly instinct as basically coming and nursing her baby or feeding that or feeling that she wants to have her that affection to her baby, whether it's a fatherly instinct or a motherly instinct and so forth, that this is part of fitra. And certainly the fitra to like our parents, to love basically our relationship with them, to feel that warmth, etc. That's part of our fitra. Now, speaking about fitra, fitra itself is فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله. There's a fitra, there's an instinct, there's a creation, there's a programming. And that programming does not change, but it can basically pacify this programming from functioning properly. What is it? Well, it's basically when the mind, when the heart is pacified away, and yes, this can distort the signals in the fitrah. So the fitra is there, has a signal. The fitra is there, has a programming. The fitra is there, has a function. But it can happen that this fitra can either, one, it can get, let's say, a weak signal, or it can basically get distorted, it can malfunction, and it can basically lose the signal completely. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us know that the things that can affect, let's say, the efficacy of all of these different fitras is basically that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you look at taqwa, when you look at faith, when you look at knowledge, when you look at even the practice of whatever different things that you're practicing in life, it can affect the signal, the programming, the basically the different fitra from either functioning or malfunctioning. Just keep that one in mind. Functioning or malfunctioning. That's why when you look at, for example, Prophet Lut alayhi salam, when he was telling his people to basically هؤلاء بناتي, telling them تأتون الذكران تأتون الذكران, and you were basically telling them, hey, why are you basically engaging in such a devious act? What did they say? Well, they just basically they said ما لنا من بناتك ما لنا من بناتك في شيء, or what was the word, exact wording? Okay, but they basically said we have nothing to do with the daughters, we have nothing to do with the girls, we have nothing to do with women. That's not what we're interested in. They didn't want women. They basically wanted the same sex. Okay, now that's when you could see that the implication was that when they wanted to punish Prophet Lut, they just said, "Well, أخرجوهم من قريتكم." That's it. We need to keep these people away. We need to separate these people. We need to expel them. We need to get them out. Why? Because they had said, well, they're just people يتطهرون. They're seeking purification, and they had now. Speaking about purification, what happened? Why they're أناس or قوم يتطهرون? What happened? Now we could say that the tahara, purification, whether pure action or whether purification in general, hygiene, because remember, if we're talking about gayism, that would actually mean they're penetrating in basically the area that was created for defecation. That's what they're doing. So they didn't even recognize that this is disgusting. So they basically considered that no, they're seeking purification. What happened? The sin made them see purity and purification as disgusting. All right? The sin made them see purification as disgusting, as something that deserves a punishment. Okay? Now, Then, of course, we would say that that ma'asi or different sins, they will have an impact on the signal of fitrah, on the efficacy of fitrah, on the power of fitrah, on the functioning of fitrah, and the list goes on and on. So whether we're speaking about the fitrah of hygiene, or whether we're speaking about the fitrah of tawheed, or the fitrah of seeking a purpose, or the fitrah of motherhood, or the list goes on and on. And certainly, when you see, for example, nations that are not Muslim, or etc., you would see social problems, you would see mental problems, you would see financial problems, all of that, and you will see a lot of injustice basically taking place. A lot of injustice. And of course, the more taqwa, you will see better harmony. Why? Because their brain was already designed, their brain, their heart, their relationship with the world around them was already designed to function in a way, to a certain extent, to function in a certain way to basically bring about that harmony, to bring about that stability. The birds and the animals, they basically would relate to their children, would relate to their function, would relate to all of that. I don't think they need to necessarily do a specific worship, even though, yes, the ayah does say, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ وَلَكِن لَّا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُم. But it was really, the main thing was really that programming in their brain and in their instinct. So when you look at that one, that's basically to let us recognize that fitrah of it. And certainly, these people, when ghafla comes in, it basically is that area that lets that person forget and get distracted and pacified away from seeking and from letting the signals of fitrah help them see the truth. أن تقولوا, that day you will say, sorry. And what does أن تقولوا really mean? Well, they would say, إنما أنزل الكتاب على طائفتين من قبلنا. What is this? Number one, like we said, some scholars actually said, well, this is to say, لئلا تقولوا, so that you would not say that. And therefore, the inference would be, this was revealed even before they had claimed such a claim, before they had uttered such a rebuttal, or at least attempted to rebuttal. So that was لِأَلَّا تَقُولُوا. So before you even say that, here's our response. That we know you're going to say that, and this isn't the first time, because the nations before you had also said the same. Why? Because they wanted to refuse to accept that there is hidayah, even though they do recognize on the inside that there is a lot of good within that revelation, and that's why they would say, لَكُنَّا أَهْدَى مِنْهُمْ. Like we said, the inference is to let us know that they do recognize that there is good within that revelation, but they want to just work on their own their own dunya and their own desires that didn't want to find hidayah. Okay, and of course, then of course you have. I want you to look at this one when they say al-Kufiyun and al-Basriyun. Where do these people come from? Put in the chat. Where do you think the people from Kufa and the people from Basra come from? None other but al-Iraq. Al-Iraq. Al-Iraq, from its name, Iraq. It's very deep rooted. It is a very, very old civilization that still, until the time of today, some of the very smartest people actually come from Iraq. But unfortunately, all the wars and all the colonization and all of what happened, even all the dictatorships that basically had controlled Iraq, had really affected the amount of good that Iraq has to give. Iraq throughout history had actually presented some of the earliest civilizations. Iraq, from its name, Iraq actually means noble. Iraq means noble. Iraq actually means rooted in nobility. Okay, so when you look at al-Kufiyun and al-Basriyun, Iraq had invested so much in Islamic sciences, had invested so much in fiqh, so much in aqidah, so much in all the Islamic sciences, like no other country. Maybe perhaps, well, we could also talk about Sham, but Iraq has its own, let's call it, box of treasures right there. Box of treasures. And let's say, and they also were the main scholars of Lugha Arabiya, despite the fact that you would have a lot of these scholars in Lugha Arabiya were of Persian origin. Just to note, were of a Persian origin, okay? So when you talk about Sibawayh, you're talking about a person that is not even Arabi. Okay, not even Arabi or even Jinni. You're talking about people that weren't originally Arab, but they were originally Persian. But the Prophet ﷺ had also told us that the ones to bring about that ilm was actually it was actually the Persians, and indeed most of the ulum were actually let's say, one, brought by the Persians. We're talking about different sciences in Islamic studies and different ulum as well. So you're talking about a lot of those scholars. Persia doesn't necessarily mean Iran, by the way. Okay, Persia was including all the areas of an extended Iran at the time. Okay, let's see. So what they said, لئلا تقولوا إن أنزلناه كراهية أن تقولوا. So I guess al-Basriyun that was really a futile I guess objection, because doesn't it mean the same thing? أنزلناه كراهية أن تقولوا, in order for you not to say, and would hate to hear you say such and such, which is basically that it was revealed onto two other nations that we don't really have access to studying. That's what they would want to say. We don't really have access to studying those scriptures, so we can't really judge whether your scripture is related to that X and previous scriptures, because we don't have access to those scriptures. We didn't have access to them. We didn't study them, but that does not whatsoever give let's say, a dismissal for the accountability. What does that mean? I want you to look at an inference here. Just because somebody does not know Lugha Arabiya, for example, they cannot say, well, I don't know Lugha Arabiya, and therefore I cannot study fiqh for me to know whether this is halal or haram. Now, just as it was revealed, and just by this revelation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them that they are still going to be held accountable for what message is within that revelation. That's the same thing. You've got some homework to do to figure out that information, to basically understand it, and to do your homework to seek the revelation, to seek the ilm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to know. And therefore, whether you study the language or whether you put the effort to at least know the information, what is being said in it, and therefore كنا عن دراستهم لغافلين is never going to be an excuse, because you would have to put in that effort to study it, to seek ilm. What is a dirasa anyways? So when you say dirasa, what in order for me to know that I'm not included in these people, and that when they said, well, we were عن دراستهم لغافلين, what is it dirasa anyways? Dirasa comes from the root darasa. Now, the word darasa, let me write that down, okay? Because the word darasa, the word darasa actually means to engrave something. So when you, let's say, you're trying to perhaps, you got a wooden thing, okay? And you start putting nails in it, or you probably start carving it. That's what darasa means. You start carving it, you start putting in nails, you start, darasa is also means to compress something. It mainly means to compress. That's the foundation of it. So dirasa, what is dirasa? So, okay, fair enough. What are you adding? You're adding an add to it. Dirasa. Okay, it doesn't want to give me the ending. Okay, maybe I can rewrite this. Dirasa. So what is that supposed to mean? Dirasa is basically, certainly it means studying, but that's not a fair description and an explanation to the word dirasa. Because dirasa, remember, الزيادة في المباني زيادة في المعاني. Any increase in the conjugation of the verb is basically an addition in the meaning. So what do? We basically look at that and what does it mean? Well, that basically is indicating one key thing, and what that is to basically indicate that there was some form of effort, some form of a mutual thing happening. Okay, so dirasa is to mean what? You are putting an effort in compressing this material. And what are you compressing it? And where are you compressing it in? You're compressing it in your brain. This material, this information, you're compressing it in your brain. So in other words, just to read it and skim through the information is not dirasa. Dirasa is when you would repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And you would take the time to fully understand it. You would take the time to learn, and you would take the time to make it as basically you. Because if something is engraved in your brain, that's dirasa. If something is engraved in your brain, then for sure it's going to have its implication on your behavior, on you. And therefore, just reading about something, listening to a lecture once, that's not dirasa. It wouldn't be dirasa unless it engraved in your brain and you repeatedly had done the action to know the information and to make it have an implication on creating your identity, on creating who you are, how you see the world, how you understand it, how you basically navigate the world around you. You basically, this piece of information is so engraved in your brain that you see the world as through it. That's a dirasa. So when you look at the word darasa and the word study, they mean two different things. They mean two different things. Because اللغة العربية is a rich language. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Quran in اللغة العربية. Because اللغة العربية is basically based on these roots to give you more than just one meaning. Certainly, if I were to interpret and just say dirasa, that means to study. I mean, yeah, but guess what? No matter how we translated the words in Lugha Arabiya, it's still going to be a very shallow interpretation, a very shallow translation. Why? Because in Lugha Arabiya, to really fully understand it, you would have to go back to the root in each and every single word to fully understand the details of what this word really contains in meanings, what it contains in inferences, and what it contains in giving us more than just one understanding. It's trying to let you get a number of different understandings, including the etymology of that word, It really has direct relationship with giving you a sense of the meaning. In Lugha Arabiya, every single word has a ruh, every single word has a spirit, every single word has a mind, has a meaning to it, every single word has a body to it. A body? What do you mean has a body to the word? What do you mean? Yes, when you say da, ra, sa, just say the word da, press on the da right there. And when you press on the da, what do you get? Well, you get both of your jaws, da, da. What do you get? Both of them compressing. Ra, there's the repetition. And the sa, what do you get? It's basically the tip of your tongue right there. And what do? It's basically letting you know there's a compression, there's a repetition, and there's that fluency. It becomes you. It becomes you. And that's the body of every single word in Lugha Arabiya. Every single word in Lugha Arabiya has a body, has a ruh, and has a mind to it. In other words, the mind basically means the understanding of it. Lugha Arabiya is dangerous. Go ahead, Ustaz Umayyah. You wanted to say what?
Allah, Bismillah. Any relationship between the darasa, the meaning of darasa here, and the other meaning of darasa al-qamah, crashing the wheat?
Well, yes, of course, because dars basically means to compress something.
Mhm.
So when you compress al-qamh or barley, what are you compressing? Well, you're compressing it because you want to get, I guess, the different the different grains within it, right? Or at least whatever's inside,
So same
right?
meaning, darasa here,
Absolutely. Darasa means to compress something.
compressing the knowledge here
Or
about
compressing the knowledge inside your brain, compressing it into engraving it into who you are, into affecting your mind, affecting your body, affecting your heart. That's what darasa means.
so
And that's why, quite
which
interesting. Some Islamic jama'at, okay, they don't fully necessarily relate to one specific jama'ah, but some jama'at, they would really focus on educating the Muslims about fiqh, about tawheed, about Islam, about lugha Arabiya, all these different things. And they consider that, that is a key thing to creating an Islamic identity. I don't think that that's necessarily enough to create a Muslim identity. Certainly, knowledge is important, but it takes more than just, sitting in a class, listening to a lecture to really create a Muslim identity. That's one side of creating a Muslim identity, but that's not entirely everything, because Muslim identity is not only when you're going over the information, but when you're repeating the information, when you're living it, when you're putting it into practice, when you're battling basically the objections, you're battling even political oppositions in order to implement such information. All of that is necessary. Or when you're putting in also this community involvement, whether going to the masjid or whether, community service, going and visiting the poor, the sick, etc. All of that is community involvement. Okay, so, but at the same time, I think that dirasa, just seeing that dirasa. So what would object or what would act as a barrier from الدراسة? الغفلة. What is الغفلة? So وإن كنا عن دراستهم لغافلين. And of course, it's this we're just getting a couple inferences here. The ayah is not necessarily giving me all the different details that I'm just mentioning, but we're trying to dig deep in learning some of the inferences. So what is al-ghafla? Al-ghafla is basically you are aware of the existence of something, but you just get pacified with something that distracts you from whatever you were supposed to focus on. So in other words, it's a pacifier, it's a distraction, And how does a distraction happen? When your focus is on something else, that other piece of thing or whatever you were supposed to be busy with, it becomes your secondary focus. And perhaps not even your secondary, perhaps not even within your focus. It basically comes out of your, let's say, your margins of sight. You know it's there, but yeah, you didn't really care much about it because to you it's not the primary, and it's not the center of your sight any longer, but you're just focusing on one area. So how does this ghafla actually happen? Al-ghafla happens either one, that your priorities are basically confused. That's one side. Your priorities are confused. You're confusing your priorities. Or two, you're also having certain drives basically occupy your mind, occupy your time, and occupy your focus, basically. And when that occupation happens, you basically lose the ability to see otherwise. You lose the ability to see other things. So what happens to you? You basically start losing focus. You start losing your mind to even relate to it, your mind to even see it, your mind to take it in consideration, your heart to relate to it, in your ruh. Certainly, if your mind and heart are pacified and busy with something else, then therefore they're not going to be at all giving any focus or any consideration to the other thing. So how does a ghafla happen? Dunya, dunya and desires. When people are running after desires or running after dunya, that's when their mind is so occupied with something else that they can't even see. They can't see anymore their priorities, so they become distracted away from seeing, one, the purpose, two, perhaps hygiene, three, tawheed, and looking for the reason why they were created, and perhaps other different behaviors as well. The list goes on with all the different fitra. The fitra itself basically loses the signal and loses the programming to even search for knowledge. Because remember, you cannot depend on fitra entirely to know the truth about your existence. The fitra itself, yes, it has some foundation to recognize justice, to recognize certain ethics, to recognize certain good things, but the fitra itself can get, let's call it pacified, or let's call it the signals basically shutting down, and that's when the person basically loses their connection with even recognizing the things around them. So when you're talking about revelation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why did He send the revelation? Because your fitrah is not enough to help you get all the information. You needed a revelation, al-wahi, that is outside of your own body to help you understand and to help you relate to the information that you would not be capable of getting on your own. There's no way that you can get this information on your own. So you basically needed sorry, your fitra is not enough for you to get that information on your own. So you basically needed a revelation to help you figure out what your instinct or what your fitra is incapable of figuring out entirely. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send the revelation تفصيلا لكل شيء, to give you all the different details about the things that you're not going to be capable of basically getting that information on your own. So is NASA one day going to say, yeah, we discovered God? The answer is no, that's impossible. Why? Because that is known through revelation. That is known through revelation. So what will NASA one day perhaps discover? They'll just discover that this world is so complex to perhaps be created on its own. They'll probably get to that conclusion one day, and probably get to the conclusion that, this world is so complex that we don't even understand how this design came to happen and why it came to happen. What is the purpose? Why is it such a magnificent creation? And then, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right there sent the revelation tafsiran li kulli shay, to give you all the details. In other words, the revelation is to answer those questions. And it plus huda, because your own instinct, yes, it may have certain, let's call it, signals to know some ethics, but you can't really depend on it fully to know everything about ethics, to know everything about justice, to know everything about maqasid and what you basically were created for, and how to basically maximize your happiness and maximize your comfort and maximize basically the good in your relationship. That's that huda. That's what revelation came with. It came with one, tafsiran li kulli shay, giving you all that information, which included huda and included rahmah. And you also are looking for mercy because you yourself, certainly you're looking to maximize, and it's part of your fitrah, to maximize your security, to maximize your longevity, your life, to maximize your health. That's part of your fitrah. To not want to die. That's part of your fitrah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know how to basically get there, and how to, one, maximize health, maximize justice, maximize basically rahmah and mercy upon us. أو تقول لو أن أنزل علينا الكتاب لكنا أهدى منهم فقد جاءكم بينة من ربكم وهدى ورحمة. Okay, man. Let's stop right here. فقد جاءكم بينة من ربكم وهدى ورحمة. I would not want to stop right here. Okay, that would be really scary. Okay, جاءكم بينة من ربكم وهدى ورحمة. We'll stop right here because of Salat al-Jumu'ah, and inshallah we'll see you all tomorrow. Oh man, tomorrow is going to be the fiqh. That's all right. At least we know where we're at. We'll continue. Inshallah.
Monday, inshallah.
Inshallah, Monday. Monday, yeah, your Monday, my Tuesday. So
Yeah.
this is it. Inshallah, we'll see you all tomorrow on the fiqh class, or in the fiqh class. Remember, fiqh of divorce is what we're doing. Okay? So
11
this is it.
your time?
Right.
11 o'clock your time or 10 o'clock?
Yes, 11 o'clock my time. If you guys,
Yeah.
inshallah.
جزاك الله خير.
يا وإياكم. So سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. Sorry ladies, but I have to go because of صلاة الجمعة. السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.